Hello, my name is Christel Wihlborg. I'm a palliative care physician in the southeast of Skåne, Sweden. I also am an educator at Palliative Care Institute, and I work together with
Jamie Woodworth, and I'm a PhD student here at the Institute of Palliative Care, and I do my research on public health perspectives on death and dying.
Today we are here to talk about Österlenprojektet, a palliative care without border. As you see, a collective vision for a better, safer and more compassionate end of life. I will just give you a brief introduction before we get into our talk. So Österlenprojektet facilitates that organizations within healthcare share connect with engagement in society regarding grief, death and dying. And we want the organizations to collaborate in between themselves and together also with the society. This is what we call the palliative care without borders. So we focus on three perspectives: care integration, education in palliative care, as well as development in public health in a model called a compassionate community. So here you can see a map of almost the entire Sweden. I'm sorry about the northern guys up there. It didn't fit the map in the screen. So the Simrishamn, where our project originates, is an area called Österlen. It's in the southeast corner of Skåne, the county, the south part of Sweden. So you see Malmö on one side and Simrishamn is the largest town on the other side, with about 15,000 people living there in that town.
So why is Österlenprojektet an important project for just right now? The reality is that in Europe, our society is rapidly aging. By 2050, it's projected that people over the age of 80 will triple. And right now, our healthcare systems simply aren't prepared to meet the needs of this many multi-sick elderly. This is an indicator that we need to develop more public health strategies so that people are more prepared to take care of one another at the end of life.
During the last century, we have institutionalized the care of the dying. However, most dying actually does happen outside, institutions, at home with friends and neighbours and family. And this is a 95% rule of palliative care. The dying person spends less than 5% of their time with doctors and nurses, and most time doing something else. This means that care also needs to be taking place outside institutions. However, lay people's familiarity with caring for the dying has decreased as our culture has changed. Public health strategies like the compassionate community model, as we will discuss later on today, attempt to spark a culture change in our communities to regain the knowledge and competence to support one another in times of grief and illness.
It goes without saying that there's never been a society that hasn't taken care of its young and dying. Throughout history, we've always taken care of each other. That's why we're here right now. And here I want to talk about what this word care really means. What is care? Historically, care has been a common resource. And in that, I'm saying that care is something that is happening between people, often family members, friends, community members, neighbors. And it's always been there, making sure that we've survived generation to generation. And often this care is performed on the basis of different gender, social, and religious norms. In other words, informal care of the dying and the young actually predates any form of professionalized care. The professionalized care that we're familiar with, the care that comes from doctors, social workers, etc. Care actually began as something that happened in the home. And still, much caring does happen in the home. I want to quote the scholar Nancy Fraser in emphasizing the internal importance of care. The labors of care are often performed without pay, yet are indispensable to society. Without it, there would be no culture, no economy, no political organization. Everything happens because we make sure one another are well first. In the Nordic countries, as with most other nations, care is framed as a human right, which is how it should be. In order to guarantee this right, societies like Sweden have created strong healthcare institutions lodged within a welfare state to make sure that care is delivered to everyone equally. In addition to this institutionalized care, care that happens in the home has not lost its relevance. It is still equally important. And as we'll get into, guaranteeing a compassionate end of life requires input from both sides. It requires input from family, friends, neighbors, etc., as well as input from trained professionals. Today, research shows that dying and bereaved people experience a high degree of loneliness. And similarly, institutionalized healthcare settings are increasingly described as alienating and isolating. As the role of healthcare institutions has grown, the social networks that have been in charge of caring for one another have diminished. For this reason, reclaiming community knowledge and engagement in care at the end of life is integral to alleviating the suffering of people who experience so much loneliness in dying and so much loneliness in mourning. At the same time, we also need to think about community caring from a feminist perspective. Second wave feminists fought for decades in order for women to be liberated from the home and be able to pursue things outside of their domestic responsibilities. And still today, women take care of most dying people. In 2017, Försäkringskassan showed that over 60% of people that took out money to take care of a sick or dying relative were women. So when we think about creating a compassionate community, we have to make a compassionate community that's also compassionate to caregivers. That means getting both women and men involved in the caring process at end of life, and making sure that the compassionate community is also based on a system of equity in caregiving.
So now I'm going to develop a little more what a compassionate community is. A compassionate community seeks to reinforce caregiving through broad-based acts of kindness and support and awareness in civil society with its support of informed policies. And a compassionate community is a new model for community development that has predominantly grown in countries like UK, Australia and Canada. The idea of this model is to reclaim the culture and societal practices around care at the end of life that has been lost in modern times.
So in many ways, the compassionate community idea is actually about repackaging old wine in new bottles. Taking knowledge, traditions, culture from the past, repackaging it to fit with our modern times, our modern culture, and our modern healthcare systems. So using this community that we once had to complement the healthcare that we have now, so that we can get an even better end of life than there ever has been before.
There are many different compassionate community projects which have emerged in the last few decades around the world. Here you see a reference to Professor Julian Abel that was recently able to publish data on the Compassionate Frome project in Somerset, England, elaborated on correlations between emergency hospital admissions and volunteer networking. So if you had a better support, a social support around sick and elderly, you could see a 14% reduction in emergency admissions and a 21% reduction in costs for the healthcare facility. This research foregrounds how compassionate community initiatives are necessary to complement to healthcare systems. So that's why our project in Österlen captures both medical and social aspects in one initiative. As I said before, is three main work packages: care integration, education in palliative care, and social engagement. We hope that patients and their families are given smoother pathways through different caregivers and the quality of life increases. And we hope we will see a decrease in medical adverse events. And also with the implementation of a structural training program in generalized palliative care for all caregivers at the local hospital, the municipality and the primary care, can identify palliative care needs earlier for our patients and their families, so they're given optimum care sooner, taking their wishes and priority into account. Our vision is to foster a more supported model around dying patients and the family with a compassionate community model. These three work packages integrate and strengthen each other for a powerful impact for end-of-life care.
So how are we getting feedback from our community members? We're having lots of community roundtables or open forums where people can come and express their needs, desires, opinions about end-of-life in Simrishamn. And a lot of this has to do with loneliness. That's a big issue that comes up. Healthcare integration, and arts and culture. So these are things that we've been trying to follow up on in activities throughout the year. And we've done that largely throughout this format called Death Cafe. And Death Cafe is basically an open room where anyone can come and talk about the issues of death, dying, and grief without the shame and stigma that's normally associated with these topics. And it's all over free, tea and cake. That's very important.
Very
popular. It gets the conversation going. A little bit of coffee. And we've been trying to thematize these, so it involves these needs that people have been trying to lift up in the community. And arts and culture has been a really big one, so we've been doing some special events on those topics.
Yeah, on the, one of the cafes in the fall, we invited Professor Anders Palm, a professor in literature here from Lund, and he spoke about the Hjalmar Gullberg poetry. That was a very popular cafe, wasn't it, Jamie?
Yeah, it was very well received.
Yeah.
And in addition to these arts and culture activities, we've also been trying to just raise knowledge about what is death and dying. How do I take care of someone who's received a serious diagnosis? How do I take care of someone who's grieving? And to that purpose, we've started Sweden's first teacher training in last aid, which is a concept kind of similar to first aid, only it's for the end of life. So it's a course geared towards improving lay knowledge of death, dying, and grief, so that people are more able to take action when death and dying come close. So things like how to say goodbye, how to alleviate suffering, very basic things that maybe we're not so familiar with or don't really feel like we're capable of doing when that moment comes.
And we do hope that this last aid course will actually spread throughout Sweden, and that you will see a last aid course in your nearby area within a year or two, I hope.
Yeah, that's the ambition.
Yeah. So we just want to go through with some of the results we had so far on this project. We have 7 large events since 2019, and over 250 participants coming to our events. And we had the Swedish first training last aid, as we said. We have several publications in local newspapers, and one publication in Omsorg, the Nordic Palliative Care magazine journal, and one in Palliative Care tidskrift, the Swedish one.
We've also made steps forward in municipal engagement. So we've made many partnerships with the municipality and participated in many public and political forums that have been going on. And we're hoping that through this partnership we can strengthen more policy development around compassionate communities. And we most recently had a meeting in February of this year, 2020, where we had the opportunity to speak to local politicians, so hopefully we'll be able to make some progress there. And we've also received quite a bit of funding from Lions Forskningsfond, Vinnova, and Österlenprojektet. So not only can we do development work, but we can also do some research so we can evaluate this process to make it scalable and replicable in other areas.
So here are our visions for our project in Simrishamn in Österlen. Right now we're focusing on how to conceptualize what Simrishamn's compassionate community would look like. For one, because neither words compassion nor community translates well to Swedish. So we need to find a new name, or maybe not, if we can spread it throughout Skåne and Sweden. We'll see. Any suggestions, we will be welcomed. And we also, as I said before, with care integration and public healthcare, we need to increase the death and palliative care literacy, the knowledge around death and dying, among the public and between healthcare workers as well.
And that's one of the things this last aid course is going to help us do, is increase knowledge about death and dying in the community. The other thing that we really want to work on is increase collaboration with the municipality and other stakeholders. As I was saying before, a compassionate community isn't something that we create, it's something that the community creates. So our role is more to empower others to be able to take the reins, make decisions, have their voices heard, and just facilitate that process. And along that line, we also want to increase volunteer participation. Many compassionate community models around the world have been mostly volunteer-driven. Volunteerism isn't as strong a tradition in Sweden as it is in other countries like the UK and Australia, but we want to find a unique way to make volunteerism work here.
I think that will be very important for the future. Actually, we in healthcare need to collaborate with volunteers in a better way. So I think that is the future. Mm-hmm. So to continue our visions, we would like to see seamless integration with an involvement in the civil society in Simrishamn and Österlen, which we hope to spread to the rest of Skåne and Sweden. A palliative care without borders.
Yeah, and altogether this means, in the end, an increased support to burdened and grieving family members as well as patients. And the rest of the visions is up to people in Simrishamn and our participants.
Yeah. So, I hope you found this interesting, and if you want to participate in this or have any suggestions for our projects, please do email us, and please also look at our website at Österlenprojektet.se.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.